Good morning, and thank you for making it here. The best part about this is we've changed the seating. Used to be stools, so the short guys, your legs would hang off, and there was no no front here. So this year it's a big change. We have backs on the chairs, which is incredible, and no short guy problem. Anyway, this is my 29th PTC, so happy to see everybody here, and love the fact that we have an incredibly packed auditorium to see amazing panelists. I'm joined by some really incredible people up here who I've known on average for over 20 years, and have incredible experts, great companies. We're going to talk about streaming the world. We're going to talk about data centers, infrastructure, and the way this interacts. The other thing that's changed is, sorry for this, but I have to wear glasses now because I can't see anything. The questions that I've written up. I'm going to pass to Ben, and we're going to do quick intros, and then we're going to go right in some questions. Just from a logistics perspective, we're going to talk for about 45 minutes. We will reserve a few minutes for questions. I just want to caveat this. We have public companies up here. They will tell me if they can answer the questions or not. We have two people who are not public companies, Mark and I, so if they can't, we'll try. But I'm going to pass over to Ben.
Thank you, Tony. So Ben Gonyea, I'm responsible for the network sourcing in the Americas.
My name is Mark Halpfinger, formerly a manager of a global network, now doing advisory around technology transformation, helping private equity, data centers, and management consultants.
Gina Haspelaer, I have the global network planning and ISP partnership activities for Netflix.
Todd Lawrence with Akamai. I run the data center strategy for the company.
Yeah, and Joel Rudd, all things connectivity at eBay. I also do data center, but I describe myself as the kilowatt guy, and then we have the megawatt guys.
We're going to start on the other end today. We're going to start with Joel. Digital infrastructure continues to grow. We're obviously all here, and some component of that, it's accelerated dramatically over the last, I would say, 18 months. I think it would be great for you to talk a little bit about, like, how are data sets being distributed? What has changed maybe in the last 2, 3, maybe looking back 10 years? And then maybe just one note on just what do you see that for you today the biggest challenge? We'll start with Joel and then come back through.
No, absolutely. I think it's one of the things that we started off with was how do we distribute data? How do we make the experience the very best for sellers and buyers in our key markets, being the US, UK, and Germany especially? And how do we do that when our core is in the United States? And that was how we started. And we had a lot of really good data around, even down into which ISPs within metropolitan areas were actually our customer experience coming through. That's how we initiated. And then it was, what can we do beyond using Akamai and everyone else there? Are there places that we can actually deploy our own hardware? And I relate that to the idea of, you're taking an airplane, you're every once in a while flying to a city, you get to a certain point where you go, we're flying so much, and we're flying so many people, maybe it's time to get a charter or buy our own plane. We looked at it the same way with hardware. We're like, what about key areas? Should we deploy this hardware and do it on our own? And that was the challenge. And then it was the whole Tetris game of finding the right power, and then if we grow, how do we grow within a certain site? And if we can't, how do we distribute that across a metropolitan area? The challenges we face now are much more geopolitical. We have different things we have to worry about, not just, hey, data can go anywhere. We need to be careful about where that data is, and then also accommodating what we've done for a long time. Now it's called AI, we just called it cool back in the day. But was the idea, how do you distribute real intelligence on the edge? And the edge can be a lot of things, a lot of people. Sure. But definitely the ability to, what happens if we're successful? How do we grow that infrastructure in one area and hopefully do it contiguously? And how do we accommodate a very fluid political scenario, and then have contingencies for those. So the challenges have changed from buyer-seller experience to, accommodating all the rules that come in play.
Go for it, Tony.
Yeah.
Tony,
I'm sorry.
Tony sometimes gets emotional. and so I'm
Sorry,
trying to keep it here, but
Making you
he's a passionate man.
You've made me tear up.
I know. I apologize.
You don't always do that, but thank you for doing that. So, Todd, please jump
Yeah,
in.
so with streaming in focus, and Akamai being in, the evolution of streaming and many, many different customers over the years and experiences, live, on demand, everything like that. For us, the journey, just to keep it simple, is, we sort of think about the top 25 largest markets. There we have at least three pops, right? Super resilient to each other, just in case one goes down. And then as we move to secondary and tertiary markets, it now is becoming like we should have 2 or maybe 3 and the next one down. But a lot of that's driven, as Gina would know, through the ISP partnerships and who's carrying that traffic and what's the best way to get it into their consumers. So it's a good experience and try to do it at scale as well as keeping the cost down. It's been a tough business in CDN. It's highly commoditized, so we're all sort of competing for performant capacity. The thing that actually worries me is going to be, where all the inference stuff is going to land, because a lot of the ecosystem down in those secondary and tertiary markets isn't super high density, right? And we're all going to need to be there. But yeah, largely we're trying to keep it resilient, redundant, at low cost, at scale, so we can just keep all of our customers happy. And we do it across, many, many countries, 140 countries or something like that. So it is challenging. We do support, a large streaming events. Certainly Thursday Night Football is super important to people. The experience keeps getting better. But yeah, largely we're just trying to keep everyone happy, provide a good cost, and be able to do it in a scalable way. We're not perfect everywhere, but yeah, that's really the focus.
Jump in, Gina.
Okay. Being at Netflix and having to support all of the top titles that members have come to admire, our biggest challenge, quite frankly, is keeping ahead of our content executives. They continue to produce content and titles, and I know that a lot of you have probably been on Netflix and watched a lot of it. You talk about adolescence, you talk about Stranger Things 5, now we're into live content. From our perspective, from an infrastructure standpoint, the scaling really, really has to do more with building more capabilities versus adding more capacity. And capacity and adding more of it is probably the easy answer. But at the end of the day, we have a very simple setup and architecture that works well. It worked prior to streaming becoming so big on the internet. I mean, we launched 120 countries overnight in 2014, and it worked. And I would say it worked not necessarily because the internet was capable of supporting it, but it really spoke to a lot of the innovation that went into building that capability and not necessarily capacity. And as Todd mentioned, we obviously can't do that by ourselves because there's this toll that sits in between where we sit and where the last mile is. And so we really depend on our partners to play a big role in helping us evolve that capability versus moving into a space where it has to completely change. Because I would say nothing that we do today is not working. It's really basically supporting the needs of the business. You talk about, and it's not about television, it's live. But it's really, introducing things like live voting on the platform in a way that allows you to scale without having to think that you need additional type of technology to do so.
Mark, we have 40 minutes and 37 seconds, so I'm going to hold you to 39 minutes, okay?
Are you trying to say I talked too much?
No.
He's worried that I'm verbose, so keep
You
it
have
tight.
30
Yes, no answer.
Yes, no. Mark, I think it would be also helpful if you can jump in and talk a little bit about, Joel brought this up, about the geopolitics. You spent a lot of time working in unique countries across the world. But apart from just the digital infrastructure growth, but just talk about the influence of geopolitics and how that's impacting passing of traffic globally as well.
Sure. Yes. You want-
In 1 minute.
In 1 minute. So, first of all, I'll enter it just from the point of view of commercial models. I think that one of the reasons that the model that Gina was describing that was so successful for Netflix had to deal with the commercial model. And and just to be even more verbose, I started in cable TV in the old days when pay TV was structured not through streaming, but rather through traps in the amplifiers that were in the network on the street, and people had to go and open a trap and close a trap. So we've moved that far in 30 years, and what was driving all of that technology was ultimately commercial model. And we've had a growth of network capability on demand because of the capabilities that existed, for example, with roaming, and for a simple approach now for delivering consumer and streaming, which is appropriate for Ben and for Gina. Todd is dealing a little bit more, what I would say, one back end on the wholesale side to the delivery, and that's the key. Yep. Any type of commercial model will drive it. And even if you were going to go into other markets, from wholesale to retail, there's no doubt in my mind that the geopolitics of network distribution is impacting. Why? Because the US government today is looking not just at whether or not a network can be intervened in by a foreign adversary, but they're even looking at ownership and whether or not a person can be defined as a foreign adversary somewhere in the involvement, because they're looking for any security gaps. That requires anyone who's building a network, whether streaming or otherwise, to be thinking about who is managing it, what equipment is being used, and what are they doing in order to protect that environment in order to deliver. That's making things ever more complex for the folks that are out there. The moment you're trying to sell Netflix to an end user, but you have to be worried about geopolitical behavior, it complicates things sometimes unnecessarily. Add to that just one other thing, and that is the issues of privacy around data management and GDPR. I want to comment that in China, for example, data is considered to be owned by the party on behalf of the people. Why? Because data is considered a means of production, and so therefore anyone can own it. Whereas in the United States, or more importantly perhaps in Europe, data is owned by the individual that manufactures that data. Different regulatory perspectives in how data is perceived also structures the way networks are built and ultimately delivered.
Mark, just to follow up on that, as we continue, larger data sets are continuing to be grown with, and we'll talk about AI in a second, I don't want to go there yet. Is there just going to be more, in your view, and this is more of a speculative question, is it going to be more difficult as we see this from a go-forward perspective, or is it?
Data distribution, you know?
Correct.
I think that PTC, with over 10,000 people here this time, is evidence of the fact that that the industry is exciting, it's robust, it's well-financed, arguably over-financed in some locations. So I don't see challenges in building out entrepreneurial or innovative approaches to getting data distributed. I do believe that the different approaches in different global markets to how data and its distribution is regulated would be a challenge, and the fact that there is no commonly accepted model for the different layers of how data is delivered. And very quickly, at the application level, which is where Joel was talking about, which is increasingly sitting on top of large language models, who sit on top of GPU as a service, who sit on top of cloud, who sit on top of the data centers and the fibers that are doing that pyramidical approach, each one of them with a different commercial model, go to market at the retail and wholesale level, and sometimes not talking to each other holistically. That's the complication, and the regulatory side of how data is, call it regulated, in different jurisdictions will be challenging.
Thank you. Ben, as we think about it, Meta is obviously growing enormously. You and I talked about this before. Reels is growing. You've got WhatsApp. How have you, just to amplify a little bit more on the question, lot going on, obviously. I see you run into in a lot of airports. But just curious as to, how are you adjusting? And I'd love to hear about sort of this whole distribution question. It's obviously impacting network data centers. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think building on the secondary and tertiary markets, we were primarily in tier 1, tier 2 markets. You could go to a multi-tenant data center operator, you could get capacity. Our network growth has been so intense that we are now expanding that to these tertiary markets where there aren't data center operators. So we've pivoted our model to use developers. And I think some of the challenges that we're seeing is obviously at a macro level, it's the power. Second to that is actually manpower. It's getting the right resources and trades in these tertiary markets where there's limited supply. And then the not in my backyard thing has been growing, even down to the 5 or 10 megawatt size sites that we build, without the understanding, because they don't have the background of what the benefits could be of a data center going in. And the groups that are pushing against that obviously have a talking point that they're working towards. So the one thing that we've done is we've tried to increase the number of partners we have, having them have expertise at the local level in these tertiary markets, and help facilitate us being able to come to market fast enough to support our network growth. And I know you're going to get into AI after, but AI just accelerates that growth even further.
And then, Ben, just quickly, as super interesting on the tertiary markets, I think that's something that folks are beginning to adopt more, realizing that you need to fan out across, not just the major cities. Any issues from a permitting perspective, which usually tends to have some challenges?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you find is that each jurisdiction has a different classification of permitting. You can be industrial in one market, commercial in another, or there's a true data center permitting. We've been trying to navigate with partners who kind of understand those different market perspectives. If you stay in a more like industrial setting with permit, you have a better chance of going through without objection. But as we've navigated market by market, markets that we thought were going to be easy have actually not, and vice versa. So every time we go into a market, we try to get advanced 6 months intelligence on what the market looks like, what areas within a given geo might be more open to data center development, and then being able to target that with our development partners.
Great. I'm going to pivot a little bit. Todd, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
Akamai's gone through you're continuing to go through a transformation. I think all the companies here have actually transformed themselves quite significantly, but Todd, we'll start with you. It was traditionally known as a CDN network.
Yes.
You've pivoted. You're starting to, with some acquisitions, more focusing on cloud, distribution of AI content, et cetera. Just curious, how has that change impacted what you're doing in a day-to-day, the company outlook, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
So obviously we're a very large CDN, globally distributed, I guess wholesale, Mark. Sure, our product folks love that. But there's competition there, for sure. Really our journey's been, CDN at the core. It's great business for us, very healthy but challenging, right? We've actually our security business is larger revenue-wise and doing really well. Thank you for the business.
Yeah, you're no problem.
Appreciate that. And anyone that's using it. And security isn't a huge burden on capacity, really, from a even traffic standpoint or horsepower standpoint. Over the last 5 years, we've been evolving to take on a compute business to try to offer compute services to our customers. Akamai has 8,000 enterprise quality customers. We want to continue on the journey with them. And that's resulted in us building out 25, the top 25 markets, compute services. It is challenging. There's folks that have a lead there, obviously, but we're servicing the customers best we can, and the power needs are going up. Even that was modest. We would do 2, 3, 4 megawatts in major markets. Over the last year or so, we're starting to pivot more into inference. Akamai isn't going to be a training model or anything like that at the core, but the middle and last mile is going to become important at some point. I'm not 100% sure how and where. What we're going to take a customer-led approach to say, hey, what do the customers want, right? There's a lot of inference platforms out there. We're starting to prepare, but we want to do it with customers in hand, and that's what we've been best at, which means we may not be charging out of the gate with, we've just built it and now come use it. It will be success-based. Starting to buy larger chunks over the last year. We've gone from 2 megawatt spaces up to 5, now up to north of 10. It's not happening everywhere all at once, but it changes our needs on planning. You can't go to market for space and power really anywhere and ask for it in 3 or 6 months. It's just not going to exist in most cases unless you've already signed up for it. You really need to be thinking about who your suppliers are in this equation. You don't maybe need to talk to everybody, but you really need to talk to capable providers who know what they're doing, and you need to be able to talk to them earlier about your needs in any of these markets. And so it's changing how we forecast, how we plan, and really the decisions and relationships we need at larger scale, because the power density is going up, the equipment's getting more and more capable, needing more. I just don't know where we're going to head from this point. I just see the challenges in the ecosystem, and obviously everyone's trying to rise to the occasion, but it is not quite figured out yet, from our perspective.
Joel, I'm gonna pick on you for a minute as well. Sorry, I still love you, man.
Yeah, it's mutual.
But eBay's gone through a fairly big transformation. You acquired a lot of companies. You brought in, let some go out on their own. As you start to think about that, that obviously changes network infrastructure, architecture. It changes the way you look at, distribution of content. Talk a little bit about how that has changed and what you've done to kind of, PayPal was part of it.
Sure.
If you don't mind, that'd be great.
No, it's actually really been cool. So I've been at eBay 25 years, and to see what we've gone through. I was there when we bought PayPal, and I was there when we got rid of PayPal, or said goodbye to PayPal. And StubHub, Skype, all of those different things. The exciting part about eBay now is that we actually focus on eBay. eBay is an amazing thing that even just left to just go, it's always made money. The exciting thing is now that we're actually focusing in on the product. And I sold a 15-year-old Fluke detector I'd had laying around, and I said to my wife, I was like, this site's legit. And I could tell the difference. I was excited by it. And the things that we were doing, I was like, and this all comes from the fact that over the last 5 years, we've really focused just on eBay. And I think it's so important. I think this is a universal principle, is to know your success criteria. And to draw infrastructure closer to the application folks has been super successful. So it used to be if you went to Europe, you did FLAP. And you're like, we're doing Frankfurt, we're doing London, we're doing Amsterdam, and we're doing Paris. And to go now, when I ended up taking over all our edge hardware, I've always been a connectivity guy. I wasn't seeking out to do all this stuff, but when I ended up running the CDN side, I ended up talking to the guys that were programming, going, what are you guys trying to do? I went to Velocity conferences, and I was like, it's hilarious. These guys, and not hilarious in a funny way, but it was, these guys are doing all sorts of things to try and make the waterfall faster and faster. And meanwhile, I can just switch over how we're doing transit and undo everything they're doing. And then it would flip revenue and do all these things. So by actually meeting with the application guys, I'll go in literally and say, what, if you could have it all, what do you want? And those conversations are really cool, because we've said, all right, it's not FLAP, it's app, or it's whatever else. And we've said availability is number one. We got to be available. So let's make sure we play to that, and then making sure that we're all looking from a success criteria perspective, we're looking at the same dials, and then we can correlate data. And that is exciting. It was exciting, doing all the different M&A stuff, and it's fun to talk about those things. But really, the fact that I was able to sell this Fluke deal, and it was super smooth, and it took nothing, I go, I can see a direct correlation to our efforts to relate infrastructure to application. And I'm excited by it. I mean, after 25 years, I'm like, man, this is a cool place to be.
Yeah, I know you and I have talked about, we got to catch up in November, and I think you were more excited about where you are today versus, kind of,
and I tell people, I've been leaving eBay for 10 years, it's like, I think that idea of challenging where you are and asking where you are, and is this thing still challenging me? And it is. I was going to mention this as well, I love PTC, and I love the people on the board, etc. We've known each other a long time, but the idea of coming in and figuring out new ways of doing things, the collaborative spirit, PTC is awesome that way, and the people that are out there, I look at it like we don't have all the wealth in the world to do whatever we want, so we got to kind of moneyball it.
Yep.
And it's like, all right, how do we figure out how to do these things together? And some of the conversations I've had over the last couple of days have been, how do we do these things? And for me, I get excited by it and working with good people. So kind of an elongated answer to that, but yeah. No, it's knowing what success looks like for everybody across the board, I think is really what I've learned.
Gina, Netflix has started where I used to get DVDs, and then we've moved to an incredible platform, which you've been a part of for quite some time now. You're now moving to live content, which is a big onus on you and your team. love to hear more. It's kind of, this transformation's not easy, and how you go about planning for it. And then what do you see kind of coming? What obstacles are there out there?
You know, as I mentioned before, I don't know that I would categorize it as obstacles as much as it is that we need to continue to innovate. And that innovation has to be rooted, from our perspective, not necessarily on technology that existed that didn't work before. So today, we entered live, as many of you know, about a year ago. We started out with the very famous Tyson versus Paul event where over 60 million concurrent viewers showed up on the network. We planned for 40. The system started to go really rocky at 45, 50. It hit 60. It was still struggling. And we learned a lot from that experience. And at the end of the day, what we learned is that live is cacheable.
Yeah.
And it's cacheable, maybe not like SVOD, but cacheable enough that we were able to, within 2 months, deliver the NFL and Beyonce on Christmas in a month and a half. Mm-hmm. And so I think what that speaks to is how important it is to really understand and have aligned goals, as Joe just mentioned, and then really have everyone focused on exactly, from an engineering perspective, what is it that we need to focus on and what are we going to deliver, and be confident and have surround yourself with the partners that are going to allow you to do that. We learned a lot on November 15th of 2024, and I have to tell you, we've come a really long way from an innovation standpoint. Our encoding technology, for example, has been super important in the way in which we think about distribution. We're not employing, multicast, for example, right? Because we have to think about distribution on a global level. I think the challenge for the industry is going to be about how do you make that so dynamic? And dynamic to us is not on-demand capacity. It's really, truly developing a distribution system that is, or distribution network that is global in nature, and not every market and not every infrastructure in every market is the same. And so therefore you have to account for that, and you have to not go down the road where it's a bespoke solution for one ISP, for example. Because there are a lot of solutions that if we decided to move forward with on a per ISP standpoint, we could be super successful, but then there's a cost component to both us and the ISP that won't allow us to be able to scale and support all of these additional applications. So, for us, it's really about not more of the same, but evolving with it in a way that is not gonna move us further away from where we need to be, which is the consumer.
Mark, you've spent a lot of time in various different, you're focusing a lot on data center space today. And
coming from the connectivity world.
Coming from the connectivity world. As you start to see, we're growing enormously within the data center space. It's been, the last 18 months has just been an incredible amount of growth. It'd be good to get your perspective in terms of one market you're specifically focusing on.
Sorry?
One market you're focusing on is in Israel, to hear about kind of how that's becoming a fairly significant location from a data center perspective, not just for the data center builds, but also because cable systems and things like that. But maybe you could give us shed some light on kind of how that's happening and what that transformation is looking like, not just there, but across the Middle East as well, which is becoming a very important area within the space.
What's interesting is I think that it's almost picking up from what Gina and Joel were saying about innovation and trying to find it. I think the driver to the evolution in Israel is the large amount of innovation that's going on. There are over 10,000 startups and well over 100 unicorns already that have evolved just in the last few years. And despite the conflict that's been going on in the region, the economy around high tech and innovation is really going crazy. Companies like Meta and Akamai, early investor actually in the R&D over there, and a large host of names as well, primarily driven, frankly, by NVIDIA, who have actually built their second largest grouping of employees outside the United States is there. All that innovation is driving, and you're seeing companies that are therefore looking for large amounts of power, not so much for the distribution of the end user as Meta or Netflix would look at, but more for the R&D out in order to be able to do that. So NVIDIA's built one supercomputer building another. And so once you have that, then you see that power element. The data centers are going crazy. But I think also what's been meaningful is the fact that there is robust connectivity into that market that didn't exist before. More subsea cables, terrestrial cables to Jordan, to Egypt, to Saudi Arabia, maybe soon even to Syria. No one would have thought that these things would have been possible a few years ago. And so I think that making sure that you're sitting in a digital corridor, strategic digital corridor, together with all the innovation drives it. And last, power production is no problem there. I think the one thing that I haven't heard too much about here is the delta between power production and power transmission. And over there, there's absolutely no problem to power production because Israel is a net energy exporter because of natural gas. The one challenge they have is making sure that the transmission can catch up. And so there's a little bit of a gap over there, but the R&D entities, particularly players like Intel, NVIDIA, and others, are pushing for that to reshape as well. So if you take the innovation approach, and I really get on board to what Gina was saying, and you take a look at where things are headed, it's quite exciting. One comment I would say towards the streaming is that here you're talking about central content finding its way out, even for live. And what we're seeing already on the R&D side in Israel is an approach to what I would call personalized streaming. That would get down to the end user, and that's going to be edge and beyond. In order to look at that, and AI, I think, and the innovation around AI is going to be driving that, but I'll let you ask further.
So Doug, can I pick up on that?
Please.
I mean, to that point, one would think that public internet exchange points are going to be more in demand, where you today, the market from a data center standpoint is more about the mega data centers that are being built. I don't hear anybody making investments in more public exchanges that are dense from an interconnection standpoint to ultimately be able to support what we're going to need to be able to accomplish.
Can I?
Yeah.
Of course, and I think Ben would probably want to jump in. It's after you, but go ahead.
Ben, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
And then
Mark.
if he doesn't get it, I'll grab it.
Or you go, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually starting to see that because the space that I'm in, both from a network backbone perspective as well as the edge perspective, I think there are now data center operators have figured out that secondary and tertiary markets don't have a traditional true ISP legacy carrier hotel exchange point. And they are looking at it not in the short term, because the short term they're not seeing like, oh, we have this high demand from all of us at the table to drive that from both the space of power but interconnection perspective. But they know that in 10 years, if inference goes to the edge, if it's the true end user is upstream and downstream at the same time, they're getting in front of it. So I will say I'm just starting to see that now, probably the past 12 months.
Yep. Go ahead.
I think that's great. I just want to point out to everyone here, here's a big guy, Meta. Here's a big lady, Netflix.
Well, she's not a big lady.
I mean, representing a big company. Sorry, Gina. Representing a big company, then, right? These are the guys. And what Gina was saying is, we want to be looking at the ISP structure for the potential distribution channel.
That's right.
Underneath that, I come back to what I was saying, is the commercial model around peering. And that model has been around since, let's call it 94.
Yes.
when NSFNet broke it out, and that is starting to undergo a dramatic shift because of AI and because of companies like yourselves taking on a larger view. And I think that the traditional IP transit players, and I used to run one of the top 10 V4 peered companies in the world, and so therefore I feel comfortable to speak about it. They may not be focused on what the big players are doing, so the big players are simply stepping in, but they're not doing so to the extent of making sure that there's a global commercial model that can facilitate all this behavior. They're doing it for individual requirements, and so the model is starting to get distorted without anyone really feeling it, and it's an issue.
Yeah.
And because that model is getting distorted, I think you're going to see a challenge to find financial support to do what you're doing from the little guys, unless players like yourselves choose to support that. I can tell you that once I did that with Meta in Africa, and it was very successful. But you need to convince the big players to want to do that.
I think touching on something, Ben, you brought up earlier that, and I think everybody's touched on this, one piece that you brought up was just people power. We're in it's great to see everybody here and more folks from various different areas within this business. If you think about the historical of this conference, it started as a voice trading business 50 years ago nearly, where you would meet East and West and just folks that wanted to trade voice minutes, which I think everybody on this panel did before, which is amazing. So, but we've all transformed and we're doing something different. It would be great to get this panel. You all are growing immensely. Your companies are. The impact of partnerships is great, but I think the impact of not having the right people in the right roles, in the right places. We talked about electricians in the past. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll start off with Ben. He's doing an enormous amount of construction, and talk about some of maybe the deficiencies and kind of areas where partnerships are playing a role and there's a gap.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a personnel, people standpoint, it's the entire gamut from even the materials. So getting the fiber, getting the ladder rack, getting the busway, UPS's generators. There's only so much manufacturing that's going on, and obviously people involved in that. And there's only so large of a supply chain that you can spin up in a given 12, 24-month period. That then rolls into at the individual site layer level. We've gone from what was 150 megawatts was a very big data center to now gigawatt level, and the number of people, the number of trades, the number of physical equipment. I have some markets where the scissor lifts, they have to import from other states because there's so much construction going on. So there's a lot of stuff that you don't think about from a buyer standpoint that could impact your project down to the layer of like what equipment can be rented easily in a given geography. So I think one thing was brought up earlier is better communication and alignment with our partners, understanding what they view as challenges. And as I'm going through my decision criteria of the timing of when I need to look at something, that might make it an elongated period, and that we can get in front of it and understand the pain points and what alternatives there are to maybe work around it.
Yeah, and I bring this up because I think we're meant to be talking solely about streaming, but there's an impact to having that stream and all this content being pushed to the market, that if you have deficiencies, whether it's people, whether it's network, whether it's partnership, it's going to impact that. And nobody wants to be without Netflix or Reels or whatever, and we have to figure out how we can maintain that. Mark, love to hear your perspective on this. I think you've got some thoughts.
You started by asking me about the regulatory side, and on the streaming element, at the end of the day, you're going to have, let's say, Netflix or Meta sitting in a, let's say, a U.S. anchored location, but they'll want to distribute it to Saudi Arabia or to Indonesia or to another location which might have regulatory restrictions about the content and the way things are streamed and so on. That's going to add further to the complexity. And I come back to the concept of, if you are going to have partnership-based distribution models, having a commercial model that plays for the whole layer of value that might be taking place, whether it's an application such as the Netflix value or some sort of other application that might be more medically oriented, let's say. There is a gap, in my view, in creating sensible commercial models for the core of the value downstream to the applicational layer of distribution. Streaming, I think, can be a meaningful way to create a monetizable approach that a per unit value can be determined. Not too different than the days of minutes. and I'm not certain that, and somehow when we transferred to roaming with some sort of flat value for gigabits, we kind of lost the concept. Arguably, the move to elements of tokenization at the layer between GPU as a service to LLMs has the possibility to recreate that, but tokenization is not uniform amongst the different providers, and that's created confusion in the market. Because, and that is, I think, the area that we can aspire to as an industry to look at more closely.
Gina, I'm going to pivot here. I think everybody wants to talk about the two-letter word, or the acronym AI. I think that's the hottest thing ever. It used to be Edge. Before that, it was how distribution was happening. Maybe talk about, because you're obviously employing it internally, you're using it. Maybe talk about how the influence at Netflix, if you can. That'd be great.
I mean, right now for us, AI is all about how do we become more efficient in terms of working. Mm-hmm. Right? AI has, the acronym now, and it's the buzzword, but at the end of the day, recommendations and popularity and data has always existed. Data science is not new.
Correct. No.
And AI is really kind of like the envelope that has encapsulated that. And so for us, it's really about productivity and getting work done faster, and not so much around the content creation space. The content that we produce is long form content. And so from an AI perspective, we don't see that there's a huge impact in the way in which it would determine how we distribute that content, because the content itself is not being generated by AI, right? So we're very much at early stages, is how I would categorize it.
But it's great to hear that it's creating efficiency, because I think that's important from an internal perspective as well. Todd, you want to talk a little bit about what's going on at Akamai?
I mean, any corporation is trying to figure out how to best use AI.
But also, are you distributing? I mean, it's, I think, both internal and external.
Yeah, and no, I'm just making the comment that we're all using AI in different ways. What we're trying to do is talk to our customers about how they're going to use it. We're really focused on, not how AI is going to help us make decisions per se. I mean, my role is going to be simply, in terms of net growth, I'll need 50% more power in the next year, and that's what's driving my role and my job. I'm a minimal user of AI, using it personally, but largely we're trying to figure out, how we can deploy the stack we need, probably in that middle last mile, so that we can help AI be more used by not maybe the consumer, but our customer who's interacting with the consumer. And it's a more complicated answer because you have kind of, aside from live, you have a fixed library, right? You're constantly doing it. We have customers that are coming in and using AI in different ways, and we're sort of in the middle of like the stack of things, but maturing, and we're a little bit different than like a neo cloud that can just put stuff out and say use it. We have to be thoughtful about our investments and how we're going to build out the next level platform. Still have our shareholders to work for. But largely, we're just preparing for that next wave. We've all seen edge plays forever. Companies have come and gone for edge. We've been in a lot of the secondary and tertiary markets for a very, very long time. But I think ultimately, AI is going to become just such a power-hungry monster, not just in the central spots, but in the secondary and tertiary markets. And we need to figure out what that means for really everybody. And in the ecosystem question here, you're doing your own thing, you're doing your own thing, you're doing your own thing, but there's a cocktail of how this is all going to work. That still fundamentally comes down to plumbing and real estate. And so I think just the size of things are the scary part down in those markets.
Joel, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's interesting because we definitely, like everyone else, are using AI internally to help us increase our worker productivity. But for years, we've been working on how do we help somebody sell a product. in the most effective way. And that has changed now to say, let's help you find a product that you maybe not even thought of, that we can take. You can scan something around a room and say, all right, what's the total value of this room? And how we do things. And I just experienced again like this last week where the things that we've done around AI are phenomenal in the ability to say, you're not a professional, I'm not a professional Fluke monitor seller, but it looked that way because it was like, I've got this thing, what's it worth? This is what it's selling for. This is the best way to make this thing viable. Do you want it sponsored? Do you want, a lot of the stuff we're doing on the edge is actually to take images and rapidly upload them, put them into a form factor that the seller can feel very comfortable about. I don't want the background. I want the right lighting. I want all these things. And so we've incorporated that, and that is really exciting to see the product. So yeah, there's definitely, we harp on this all the time inside. Use AI for your daily tasks and that kind of stuff. But as a product, our product has improved because we've said, hey, let's get somebody in here. Let's have AI be the professional that sits with you and sells this product. And it effectively sold the product. I hardly did a thing. And I could see that development helping me along the way.
Ben, there's been, obviously, your company's been in the news a lot about the AI product. Maybe talk a little bit about that. I wear the glasses, they're incredible, so thank you. I know you developed them personally.
Oh yes, absolutely.
But maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both internally. We use Meta AI internally to improve our efficiency, but then if you look at our suite of apps, that's now an overlay on those. And then it also obviously supports the glasses and the new technologies or other things that'll be added to our devices. And I think going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation is all of those will drive that demand that Todd brought up on the second tertiary markets. Because if you're wearing glasses and you want both a user experience that's yourself, but you're also uploading what you're seeing, that's going to create a big strain on the network. And those networks that are at the mobile operator level at those tertiary markets aren't built for that types of gigawatts of power needs that could be spread out, through a whole region today that's centralized in training models, but it will be dispersed in the future across, dozens of markets.
Mark, any thoughts on that?
I'm using AI on a regular basis. My thoughts are that actually there are a lot of questions around at the equity market level whether this is a bubble. And my sense is that whether the concepts of valuation around the evolution of the services that we're all talking about is correlated, I don't know. But the supply and demand of value and its exponential and rapid pace will definitively continue. And I go back to 1998, 99, 2000, when we were all, as you have chosen to point out, in the business. At that point, also huge demand, bubble popped in 2000, 2001, but the demand for the services didn't stop. On the contrary, it just increased.
That's
the
right.
fact that there was a mismatch between value correlation and the evolution of the business was irrelevant. When I look at it now, I think that will definitively continue, and the pace of that evolution will continue much more aggressively than before. And AI, and eventually also quantum, which we're not talking about, will drive all of these components. These are the things that will be making everybody crazy as we go forward. Last comment is, we're going back to old style distribution, which was central office, local exchange, getting to the home, okay? And now the home just happens to be this thing, often, but sometimes also in other locations. The amount of bandwidth that's available, all of the complementary distribution technologies, whether satellite, mobile, fixed, whatever the case may be, we're just rebuilding that same type of distribution and thinking through the commercial model of that distribution.
Thank you. We're out of time. I want to thank everybody here. Incredible panel. Great to see everybody here. And thank you very much. We'll see you in the next show.